Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, September 7th, 2017. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week we go back to Minneapolis to talk to Joe Pond of Olvalde Farmhouse Ales. Joe brews rustic beer on a farm in Rollingstone, Minnesota that features native and local ingredients. If you're new to homebrewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. If you buy any of our DVD combos, you get a free, nifty Basic Brewing bottle opener. And don't forget to get a copy of our Brewer's Logbook. You can use it to log and track up to 50 batches of beer. And if you spill water in it, like I did the other day, it'll dry out. It'll be just fine. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. We also have a Basic Brewing radio and video page on Facebook, facebook.com/basicbrewing. And I just signed up for Instagram for some reason, although I'm still figuring out how it works. So if you have any clues, any hints, let me know. Thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us first. Go to basicbrewing.com, click on our ad on the right-hand side of the page. Then you can shop to your heart's content. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you this show, and we greatly appreciate your support. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site as well. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone app on iTunes, our Android app on Amazon.com. We have a Windows Phone app. We're on the BlackBerry podcast directory, and we're on the Stitcher app as well. We're on Google Play Music and the iHeart Radio app, too. And if you want to do us the favor of rating us on iTunes and maybe leave a nice comment, that'll help new listeners find us. I appreciate those who have done so already. And finally, if you want to put a tip in our tip jar, some coinage in our virtual guitar case, you can go to basicbrewing.com/support. And thanks to everybody who's done so already there. Let's take a peek into the mailbag, shall we? Joe from Portland, Oregon writes, I've heard you talk about your 15-minute pale ale several times on the show, and finally last month I decided to try it. I followed your recipe from the Basic Brewing YouTube channel and ended up with a 2-hour brew day. I have to say this is a lifesaver since my wife is 36 weeks pregnant, and time is very valuable these days, to say the least. Wow. Joe says, after about 3 weeks of fermentation, I ended up putting 1 ounce of Mosaic cryo pellet hops along with the pale ale in my keg. I ended up with a delicious hoppy session ale that tastes every bit as good as the all-grain recipes I'm used to brewing. That's good news. It was my first time using cryo hops, which I have to say are worth their weight in gold. They really pack a delicious punch. Now, with a little one on the way, I'm happy to say I'll be switching to this 15-minute extract formula for my future brews. Have you attempted this brewing formula with any other styles, like a stout, a wheat beer, or a porter? Joe says, I'm considering doing a 15-minute stout with some roasted barley and UK chocolate as my steeping grains. Well, first off, Joe, congratulations on the one on the way. For those who aren't familiar with the 15-minute pale ale concept, it's an extract beer that's only boiled for 15 minutes. You double up on the amount of bittering hops at the beginning of the boil that you'd use for a standard 60-minute boil to account for the decreased utilization there. And you add more hops at the end, too. The result is a very quick brew day, as Joe says, and a very tasty, hoppy beer. As far as styles other than pale ale to try with a shorter boil, a hoppy wheat beer would be fun as well. A hoppy Belgian-style beer would be tasty, too. Not sure how the increase in hop flavor would work with a stout or a porter. But, you know, this would be a fun small batch experiment, especially. If you try the stout recipe, let us know how it goes, Joe. And if you out there have also tried the 15-minute technique with styles other than just the pale ale, drop me a note and let me know. Anton from Albert Lee, Minnesota writes, what base style can I mash at 10 gallons and then divide into 8 to 10 different 1-gallon beers? Reason is I have a yearly get-together with some friends in February and want to show off my brewing skills. Thanks for your help, Anton says. I'm currently working through the archives, and I started in April with episode 1 and now at October of 2009. Never a dull moment. Wow. Anton, there are a lot of things you can try. Splitting up a batch like that. The thing that comes to mind most quickly is a pale ale experiment comparing different hops. You could brew the base beer, and to make it easy on yourself, just dry hop with different hops in each fermenter. Or use hops in some and different chili peppers in others. Like Steve and I did a chili pepper experiment one time. Or maybe different fruits. Put in the same beer, adding a little bit of fruit in some. Different yeasts. Man, there's just a ton of things that you could do. The imagination runs wild. Just be sure to keep detailed notes on what you did with each of them, and be sure to label the fermenters well, and then label the bottles well. Because it's not fun to come back and say, that was delicious. What was it? Not sure. So anyway, have fun playing with it, and I'm sure that your friends will be impressed. And speaking of lots of different hops, let's have a word from our sponsors, Desiree and Dave of High Gravity in Tulsa. Right now, High Gravity is having a sale on select 1-pound bags of hops. Until September 15th, you can get 20% off 1-pound bags of Amarillo, Cascade, Centennial, Chinook, Citra, Columbus, Falconer's Flight 7 Seas, Falconer's Flight, UK Fuggle, Hallertauer Traditional, German Tettnang, and Willamette. You don't need to enter a code. Just go to highdgravitybrew.com and select the 1-pound size to get 20% off until September 15th. And while you're on highdgravitybrew.com, be sure to check out their awesome turnkey electric brewing systems and Warthog electric brewery controllers that take the pain out of propane. Tons of options, from 5 gallons all the way up to 2 barrels. Check all that out at family-owned and operated highdgravitybrew.com. Now, we recorded a bunch of stuff in Minneapolis when Steve Wilkes and I went up to HomebrewCon. In addition to this interview, I have one more left in the can. And boy, I have to tell you, it's a luxury to have content waiting in the wings when you produce a weekly show like this. If you don't, or if you'll recall, Kevin Welch of Boom Island Brewing took Steve and me around to different Minneapolis breweries when we were up there for HomebrewCon. And at the end of the day, we came back to Boom Island where we met Joe Pond. Joe runs Olvalde Farmhouse Ales, and his approach is to explore ingredients he finds around his family's Rollingstone, Minnesota farm to add flavor and complexity to his beers. Okay, here we are. We are in the brewery, and we hear the tasting room in the background. Here we are at Boom Island Brewing Company, and our host this evening is Kevin Welch.
I would call myself a co-host. The host here is James, but anyhow, thanks for being here, James.
Well, I appreciate your hospitality, and do you want to introduce our guests or our featured brewery for this podcast?
Yep, absolutely, would love to. We've got Joe Pond from Olvalde. And Joe, tell us just a little bit about your brewery.
Yeah, I opened a brewery about 6 years ago on my in-laws farm. I own it and operate it myself. We brew in we call it, I usually say rustic ales. So we ferment in old dairy tanks. We try to use as many local ingredients as we can, stuff we can grow on the farm, and operate as a small family farm.
Now, you give us some of the history. I mean, how did you come about as a brewery? You sort of stumbled into this, or you kind of came into this sort of on accident?
A little bit, yeah. My education was in chemical engineering with an emphasis on biochemical engineering. And I was really interested in brewing at the time, even in school, but I started working at Goose Island Brewing Company about 15 years ago in Chicago, helping them out with engineering work. And at the time, they didn't really have enough engineering work for a full-time guy, so I would fill it in the cellar, fill it in the brew house. In the laboratory, when the lab manager was out on maternity leave, I would run the lab. So I kind of learned all the different facets of brewing there. After a few years, we wanted to come back to Minnesota, where we're from and where our families are. So I worked at Summit Brewery for a short time, and then in St. Paul. And then we opened up out on the family farm. We really wanted to have a brewery where we could have a family farm and have a business on the family farm. And as an engineer, of course, I was most interested in low-tech brewing. Engineering it's wonderful and fantastic, and a lot of times breweries in general, as opposed to wineries, breweries are industrial and wineries are agricultural. And I always looked at it as that's a distinction. I guess it's accurate technically now, but it wasn't always accurate, and it doesn't necessarily have to be accurate. So I was always interested in doing something a little bit different and trying to take, at least with our brewery, back to an agricultural-oriented brewery as opposed to an industrial brewery.
And so, in a way, you're kind of preserving the family farm as well, right?
That's the goal. We're working every day to try to do that. So we got some work to do. But yeah, we're on our way, and hopefully it'll give us a little more free time than milking cows every day.
So talk about your setup. You're an engineer. Did this come into designing your system?
Well, yes, it did. Of course, we wanted to do things both low tech and cheaply, but with of course, when you're an engineer, you always think about the engineering of everything you do. But certainly, there are a lot of our system. We had to be very particular about when you're running it yourself. And of course, there's particular laws in Minnesota. We're self-distributing, and I'm the only salesman, and doing all the deliveries myself as well. So we had to design it in such a way where it was big enough where we could brew enough beer, where I still had enough time to go out and do the sales and delivery and support, but not so big as to have tons of beer sitting around all the time and cost $1 million and all these kind of things. But certainly with engineering in mind, a lot of attention was paid to how can you brew a modest amount of beer at the scale we're operating at, with no refrigeration, so managing the heat, especially with the seasons we have in Minnesota. Can't let if your tanks are too big, they're going to heat up a lot with your fermentations. So you got to keep that balanced. And even how to chill the beer and those kind of aspects. So there's certainly a lot of engineering that went in that was involved. Yeah.
So you are taking a non-traditional, or maybe it is a traditional approach to ingredients. You're not just following, the Reinheitsgebot and brewing beer with the four main ingredients. Talk about the kinds of ingredients that you use, where they're sourced from, and your plans for the future in that regard.
Yeah, my family's English. Reinheitsgebot, Schmeinheitsgebot is what I usually say.
We like to say Reinheitsgebot is a four-letter word.
You read about the history of brewing, at least 5,000 years of brewing, probably longer. I would imagine longer, and up until 1530. And before that in other parts of the world too. But they brewed with whatever they can get their hands on, and if it tastes good and goes with your food, then use it. That's my philosophy. Especially looking at a farmhouse brewing setup where we really want to focus on what we can grow on the farm. Of course, we can grow barley, and we have many years. But we can also grow and use other grains, rye, wheat. They're both delicious and have great flavor. Corn is so ubiquitous in this region, and you don't add it only because it's cheap and it has no flavor. It has a flavor. It tastes like corn. And if you buy it flaked or something, it's more expensive than the malt. So, those excuses you often hear about big breweries use corn because it's cheap and flavorless don't really add up. But also other ingredients as well. Hops are wonderful. They do a lot of good things for the beer. They're bitter. They're preservative. And you can have them with all kinds of aromas. I have a few problems with different kinds of hops. One, I don't like growing stuff that people own that I have to pay them to grow, or I can't replant. I'm an open source kind of guy. So I like plants that grow, and I can grow them, and I can collect the seeds, and I can grow them again. And nobody claims ownership over them other than nature itself and the people that do the work to grow it. And in addition, any home brewer knows that hops might have a preservative effect, but it sure doesn't stop that lacto from growing. So the preservative effect of hops are a little bit overblown. There are a lot of herbs or other ingredients that we can grow that grow natively that we haven't used for a variety of reasons, mostly because I guess Mediterranean cooking is way better than our own cooking. but we certainly can. They do everything hops do. They smell great. They can add bitterness. They can also have preservative properties in the beer as well. So they can do everything hops can do. If it matches your food better, what you're eating, then I say, why not?
So do you, if you can grow your own grain, do you malt your own grain?
We're working towards that. So in Minnesota, we need to have another facility so that we can produce it in a licensed facility for use in beer. We don't have that right now. So for 6 years we've been working to get enough money to tackle that project, which we haven't yet. So we have been able to use some of our own raw barley. And then of course we've done some malting on site to proof of concept to show that we can do some floor malting, then used in our own recipes for development to show that we can. So we're not there yet, but that's what we're moving towards. Yep.
So shall we taste something? What have we got? What have we got to start with here?
Absolutely. Number one was we planted a brewer's garden 6 years ago when we first started. I passed it around. It's a beer we released late last year called Ale from the Old Vale. It uses two native herbs, bee balm and another one called giant blue lavender. Bee balm smells like oregano, and the giant blue lavender smells a bit like fennel seeds. We used hops that we grew on the farm as well. It's nice and big and aromatic, and then we soured it as well with local native lactocultures that we get right out of the air at the brewery. So it's a little bit sour, a little bit bitter. Smells a lot like oregano. Great with pizza, Italian sausages. These were the first herbs where we grew enough of them on the farm to do a full about 300-gallon batch of beer.
So no hops in this.
There are some hops in this one.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, some that we grew on the farm, and then a few that we purchased as well. So.
I was paying attention to pouring there for a minute. I might have missed something. Okay, I'm going to taste. Steve has been tasting. Hi, Steve.
Hey, James. Can you hear me? What am I supposed to say?
What do you think of the beer?
Okay, it's delicious. I think it's really good, and yeah, I do get the oregano, but that's coming from bee balm. Is that bergamot?
It is. Yeah, bergamot is we use as another common name for it. Yep.
Well, it really, I mean, it's quite remarkable. There's a lot of flavor, a lot of different flavors going on here, and I do get the oregano out of it, and it is a little sour. It's a more substantial beer than I was expecting it to be, and it's a very interesting concept. I really applaud the whole, bottle, farm to bottle concept.
So what? It is delicious. It's Steve's catchphrase, but it's it's delicious. It is slightly tart. There are some citrusy characteristics in there, along with the spice. It's refreshing, but it does have some substantial body, and it's delicious. Now talk about the yeast profile. Talk about the yeast that you used, and talk about yeast management. I mean, what time of year was this brewed, and do you have to plan your brewing if you don't have refrigeration for your fermentation? Do you have to kind of plan around the seasons?
Absolutely. That's a little bit one of the challenges. We're in Minnesota, and we have four really, unique, I don't know if they're unique necessarily, but distinct seasons. Winter is winter, and that's what everybody hears about in Minnesota. It's winter. It doesn't last that long. It's about 3 months of cold and some snow, which is really wonderful for brewing because it's cold outside. You're boiling. You open those doors up, and it's so refreshing and nice. Winter is fantastic for brewing. Spring is very spring-like. It's transitional. You get a lot of rain. Summer is hot and humid for a few months. And then fall takes you right back to winter. So it's generally really another transitional month, nice dry, crisp air as opposed to the moist air of spring. So when you don't control the temperature of your brewery and you don't control the temperature of your fermentations, of course, you're going to have seasonal variations in brewing. So we approach that as a strength, really. We love seasonal food in Minnesota. We have trout in the spring. We have venison in the fall and winter. We take advantage of that. We have the gardens. You have early, spring vegetables, winter vegetables, gardens are, all through the summer, cornucopia of vegetation. So we eat seasonally, and we try to brew our beer seasonally as well. So this beer was brewed in the summer last year. So it does have, it's more the height of the yeast flavors, because we start the beer pretty cold, and we use fairly low pitch rates, so it doesn't gain in temperature too quickly, where it can have a lot of and I don't like to use the term off flavor. I think all flavors are wonderful, except the ones that aren't. But not too much anything. You try to keep it within control. But the yeast we use does produce quite a bit of fruit flavor, a lot of apple, a lot of pear. And it sticks around for a while, especially in the summer beers. For management, of course, it does make a big difference, season to season, and frequency. I've always found that using old yeast isn't necessarily bad. When it's stored warm and not chilled, but kept on the beer that isn't chilled as well, it tends to hold up pretty well. Older yeast that's a little stressed out has a little longer lag at the beginning, but I've always found it produces a little bit more of those great yeasty flavors, because the pitch rates are a little lower otherwise. There's yeast that looks alive that maybe doesn't quite perform, and so you start with a lower rate. It grows a little bit more than it otherwise would. You get a little bit more of that yeasty flavor out of it. And of course, we age on lees and we don't filter. It's that rustic farmhouse brewing, so that flavor all perpetuates into the beer. We re-ferment in the bottle again using fresh fermenting beer, so it traps in a lot of those young, fermentation flavors again in the bottle. So even the light aromas that might normally go off into the air, trapped in there.
Do you have any worries about yeast autolysis, or the yeast dying in the beer and putting off flavors?
And certainly, old autolyzed yeast can do it. I've never found it to be a problem in any of the beer we've produced in bottle conditioned with yeast. And we produce. When we first started, I was only in 750 milliliter corked and caged bottles. And part of that is because that's how I like to drink. I don't like to carry a tool around with me. But part of it is it works really well for re-fermenting in the package. It's a good ratio of the amount of air head space that you have in the package to the amount of beer that you have in the package. In addition to that, at the time when we opened, there were very few liquor stores in our area, at least, that carried large format bottles. And if they did, they were always held warm. So we put an emphasis on making beer that would be, if not very flavor stable warm, they would at least age very well warm. So high alcohol beers, generally low hop aroma beers. And then, of course, re-fermenting in the bottle does a really great job of scavenging oxygen. As long as it stays at a moderate temperature, we never really had a beer that had a terrible autolysis flavor. And some of them we've had quite a bit of yeast sediment in, because we go for, with the big cork bottles, you can take advantage of being able to hold a little bit more pressure in there, so you can be a little bit more aggressive, and we've taken advantage of that with several beers to really put quite a bit of carbon dioxide into the beer and give it a nice zest. And when you krause it, of course, that means you got to put more yeast in there as well, because you have the correct pitching rate in the fresh beer. The more you put in, more sugar you transfer, which means the more volume you transfer, means the more yeast density you have in that bottle. So it's always a concern. But with big flavorful beers, we've never really noticed a detrimental yeast autolysis when even in beer that's kept 70 degrees, 75 degrees in the bottle for a long time.
So if you have a big hoppy beer, they, especially warm, they can age poorly. The hop characters can fade quickly. The hop bitterness can fall out. When you're flavoring with these, I don't know whether to call them traditional or non-traditional ingredients, non-hop ingredients, do they age in the similar ways?
Absolutely. And when we've been growing these herbs, that's been one of the things we've looked at. You do test batch of beer and then we'll age it. So we'll see how those different flavors age over time in the bottle. And even the ale from the Old Vale, it's more oregano than fennel. When it's first bottled, it's much more fennel. And that does drop off modestly quickly. So you have to be aware of that and know it. If you want it consistent on the shelf, you have to hold it at the brewery until that fennel levels off. So every herb is like that. They don't get the light struck characters. They don't have the chemicals that have the light struck reactions that hops do. And I found most of what we have used and tried, we don't have the kind of that rancidity, the cheesiness that hops develop. Usually they have their flavor until they don't. and then they're gone without any further negative impact or any other negative impact. But that, of course, is different from herb to herb. It depends on the oil, the particular oils that are in the herb and the balance that are in the herb. So,
where do you do your research? Where do you find out what are the ingredients that you want to play with?
We've always I'm a big fan of reading into how people brewed throughout history. So, we've dug through as much as, a whole lot of we can find of historical books of whatever you can find for Groot ales in Europe through the Middle Ages and what they were using to flavor beers. And those sources are real sketchy. So on our farm, we do that. We use a lot of those, but we also put a good emphasis on what we can grow native, what the native plants that we have that taste really good, and how those match with the flavors that we have or the foods that we eat. So we use a lot of great books. I've used a bunch of home brewing books. The one I can think of the name of right off the top of my head is Homebrewer's Garden, which has a whole litany of different herbs, many of which are native and many of which are not. We've used that. Other than that, my mother-in-law is a master gardener, and so we have all kinds of plants all over. We just smell everything we can. And we're out in a very fertile valley in southeastern Minnesota. We have hills, and so we have all kinds of flowers that grow. So you're walking around and you're smelling everything, and you see what it is. You see what you got. You see what grows well. We really love native plants that smell good. So, like I said, in this one we have the wild bergamot, or the bee balm. We refer to as bee balm. A lot of mints grow really well around here. There's valerian, which is there's native varieties and European varieties. We see it all over in northern Minnesota, which the flowers are in bloom right now, and they smell fantastic. We made a corn lager for my brother-in-law's wedding where we used valerian flowers as an aromatic, and it was marvelous. But yeah, we really put an emphasis in experimentation. What has good flavors? What do people like? What smells good? And then again, what people have used throughout history, what we can, any source we can find. Did people use it? Did people not? Let's try it too.
Of course, we got to say that you should do research on plants before you use them to make sure that they're not toxic. Just don't go on a walk in the woods and start eating anything and seeing what it tastes like and putting it in a beer. Yeah. But with proper research, you can find some things that you can dredge up from the past and give new life.
And the FDA, the FDA has a great list online that you can find of herbs that are controlled, so that we know that there's cause for them to be dangerous. So look it up on the FDA. They have it on the website too. If there's any question about if anything might be dangerous or might not be.
So there you go. Now we've got another beer here, and this one is a caged and corked bottle, and I'm going to taste while you talk.
So this beer is a beer we did as a collaboration with some guys who were opening another farmhouse brewery up by Duluth called Oakhold. It's not open yet, but they came down. Their emphasis is on oak-aged sour beer. They have their own cultures of Brettanomyces and lactic acid bacteria. Do a secondary fermentation in oak. So we used our ingredients at our brewery, their organisms, and then we at the farm grew nasturtium leaves, or nasturtium plants, which are not native. They're nice annual plants. They have a peppery flavor. They were used as a pepper substitute in England during World War II. So the idea was they have a little bit of I think they have a little bit of a horseradish-like pepperiness. So the idea was to match that lactic and horseradish, which if you're thinking German food, and we think German food a lot, that was the idea. So it was us and them. We used 6-row malt. We used a little spelt wheat malt. Their yeast and lactic acid bacteria, aged a secondary fermentation in oak barrels for about 6 months, and this is what we came up with.
Wow, it's very bright. It's very bright and flavorful and refreshing, but there's a lot going on in there where it is a nice, light, refreshing beer, but that I think might be Steve is working his way over. You're working way over so you can say it's delicious. But
I wasn't going to say that. I never say that.
But there's a lot going on in that beer. You can taste some of the wood. I do get some of the pepperiness of the flavors. What do you think, Steve?
I'm not going to say it's delicious. I think the thing that stands out the most to me, beyond the brightness, is it tastes like really, really good bread crust. So that kind of crusty French bread, baked goodness, I really get a lot of that, and I really like that. I always like that in beers. And so it just reminds me of either the best part of the pizza, which is that really good bread part, or really good French bread, but not the doughy part in the middle, just the crust. How's that? Am I doing okay?
I think it's delicious.
My brain just filled it.
So what do you say to that?
Yes.
Delicious.
Yeah. It's a great. We've never done a collaboration before. These guys hadn't opened yet, so but we were friends with them, and we know their beer is wonderful. So it was something we really thought we could do something where two farmhouse breweries, their Britannomyces and Sac East with the lactic, we thought would really pair nicely with what we could do. We're real happy with the result. This is a good summer beer where we're going to be out in our Minnesota heat. Which is hotter than most people think it is. Out in our terrible oppressive Minnesota heat, drinking a nice sour beer with a little bit of peppery nasturtium, and having it with garden vegetables, and we're happy.
Okay, so are there some rules to follow if you're using these ingredients, these traditional ingredients? Are there rules to follow of when you add them to the boil, or how do you use them in the beer?
Everything's a little different. If the best rule of thumb, most of these herbs have pretty light aromatic oils, so late at the end of the boil is probably the best time to add most of them, if not into the fermentation tank. So fermentation tank works really well for a lot of them. The amount that you would use from herb to herb varies incredibly significantly, depending on how much. So. And then, of course, how long it lasts. I use, to get a good balance of flavors, for instance, just as an example for a beer we had, the oregano to the fennel, you have to use 10 times more bee balm than you do the Blue Giant lavender. I mean, tenfold is an enormous difference in the number of herbs you use. So always, what we try to do is make teas out of the herbs and then kind of add them to kind of a blank beer or a blank beer early to get an idea of the relative impact these herbs will have on the beer. But, especially as home brewers, it's better to test than to have rules of thumb. Test, and, you can start a little light or start a little heavy. It depends on your taste. I like flavor a lot, and I can tolerate quite a bit of flavor, so I generally start a little bit heavy and then dilute it down with a blank to kind of dial in, about where do we want this flavor. A lot of times people start light. Well, that means you're going to be, it's going to take quite a long time to figure it out. Whereas if you start heavy and then have something neutral on the side, you can blend it off and kind of get an idea where you're going to be. But it's real hard to give you a rule of thumb for, fruit. You can say 2 pounds a gallon. It's a pretty good rule of thumb. Herbs are all over the board. It can be from ounces to pounds, and it's all over the place.
So by making teas and blending with a neutral beer, you can start to get the idea of those flavor combinations and the amount of the ingredient that you want to use.
Yeah, and it can be variable. If you try to do it too concentrated, sometimes it doesn't always scale linearly, like a line down. It's not half as strong, but generally that does work pretty well as long as you're not way over the top. So start with a nice strong dose of herbs late in the boil is the easiest and most sanitary way to do it, right? Or into the fermentation tank. If you're very, very good about sanitation, or you don't mind a little infection, and then use those strong beers, blend them off with light or neutral or unherbed portion of the beer to kind of get your idea about what your rate or what your preferred amount is. Yeah, and if you're a really adventurous home brewer and you have, Ideally, like this is the way you do it. You have one blank and 5 more that's exactly the same copy, but each with a different herb added, and then you can blend them all together and figure out exactly where you want to go. It really cuts down on the number of times that you have to brew the same beer over and over, trying to adjust. Say, if you're adding 2 or 3 herbs, you have to vary them all independently. It can take quite a bit of time to figure out where you want to go. So.
Small batches.
Small batches. It reminds me of the chili beers that we've done. Yeah, same approach.
Yeah, and the hop experiment that we did, where we did 3 small batches, where I only added hops at 60 minutes in one, 30 minutes in another, and only a flame out in the third. We tasted the difference between those, and then blended them back together. And so we say it often: if you brew a lot and play with different ingredients, and really get some experience under your belt about what these things really taste like, then you can gain more confidence in making your own recipes.
Exactly right. And the more you brew, the better you are, right? It's true for most things, yeah. Yeah, and if you approach it in a very meticulous way, of course, you get there a little bit faster than if you do it in a haphazard way. So, yeah, be meticulous. And if you're home brewing with all grain, you put in a good solid day of work to get that batch of beer off. But if it's 6 gallons and you can break it into 3 2-gallon portions, it's well worth your time and effort, because 2 months down the road, instead of starting again with trial 2, you're starting again with you're almost there, as opposed to So I would absolutely that's the way I go about my brewing as well. So I hope it's smart.
Well, it tastes smart to me. Very nice. Well, I certainly appreciate Kevin for the hospitality, and we're going to talk to him next. We're going to put him on the spotlight next. We certainly enjoyed the beers, and we appreciate the advice. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you very much. I love being on it. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks again to Joe and Kevin for introducing us. It's fun to go back and listen to these interviews again after not hearing them for so long. And, of course, thanks to my buddy Steve Wilkes of stevesbrewshop.com for coming along and adding good content or good comments as usual. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to James at basicbrewing.com and just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our support link where you can throw a couple of bucks into the tip jar by subscribing financially to our podcasts. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site. Get a free Basic Brewing bottle opener with any DVD combo. And you can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store as well. You can find our logbooks where you can track and log up to 50 batches of beer. Check all that out at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We greatly appreciate the support there. Featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Pre-Tox for Hangovers, Natural Liver Supplement with Prickly Pear, Milk Thistle, Cysteine, and Electrolyte Blend, and Picnic Time Cellar Insulated 6-Bottle Wine Tote. Thanks again, everybody, and remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We greatly appreciate your support. And don't forget, you can also join the American Homebrewers Association and subscribe to Read Your Own magazine through the associate links on basicbrewing.com. It's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.